finally, I get to talk about this. Marvel's Spider-Man 2, brought to us by Insomniac Games, which brought us their first game in 2018, along with the Miles Morales edition 3 years after. 2.5 years, actually. Kinda, if you do the math correctly. This is a follow-up to the previous Marvel's Insomniac Spider-Man, where a few years after the events of the first game, Peter reconnects with his friend Harry, while also trying to grow in his relationship with Mary Jane, along with helping Miles Morales come into his own as his own version of Spider-Man. That's a very basic and surface-level description of what happens in here, and I guess if we're gonna talk about this game, I've got to go into some of the spoilers. No, I'm going to go full-on spoilers. I don't know if I'm going to be able to cover every single detail in here, because there is so much ground to cover in here. And in a lot of ways, it's a bigger game as far as its scope and scale. Along with the plot and character stuff, there's some other things that they do with the gameplay, which we will get into. But full spoiler warning if you don't want to know what happens in here. It's been a few weeks, so I would imagine most people have gotten through the main storyline by now. But a quick recap, I really love the first game that Insomniac brought to us, and I really like the Miles Morales edition as well. The first game was a huge surprise. I did not anticipate it to be as good as it was. In a lot of ways, it was like the first Iron Man movie, where it just came out of nowhere and took everybody by surprise. Portrayal of the character, the storytelling, which is very reminiscent of what we saw in the first two movies by Sam Raimi, and how it showed the eventual downfall of Dr. Octavius, along with the portrayal of other characters like MJ, Miles being introduced and becoming Spider-Man, and the showcasing of various other characters like Electro, Scorpion, Rhino, Shocker, Norman Osborn, who is clearly being teased for something really big. We'll talk about that later. Everything with that game was something that I never realized that I wanted. And of course, as time went on, the face change was made to the character of Peter Parker. I was not too crazy about that, and to get this out of the way, I'm still not really fond of it, because I would prefer the original look. But the reason being was because they wanted to make him look like the actor Yuri Lowenthal who plays Spider-Man in these games. And while I certainly understand the reasoning for it, I think it's also trying to keep it in line with the current Spider-Man in the movies, Tom Holland, because they do look very similar. Whereas in the previous game, I felt that he was more like an Andrew Garfield variation. Now, having played the first game recently in order to prepare for this one, I thought he looked more like a blend of Tobey and Andrew all in one. This one, he's a blend, I think, of Tobey and Tom. I prefer the original look because he also looks older, fitting with the idea that this version of Spider-Man is older and has had more time as a crime fighter in New York. When they made the face change, I thought he looks way too young. Having played through this game, I've accepted it. This is how it's going to be, then so be it. I can't really speak for anybody else, but I would imagine that across the board with Spider-Man fans, it was pretty big. I was really looking forward to seeing what they would do here. I mean, I knew Venom was going to be in the game, but I still wasn't anticipating certain things turning out the way they did. I kept my distance from the speculation about the game, wanted to try to go in as fresh as possible. There's nothing wrong with talking about what could happen, but I kind of prefer that approach personally. I mean, sometimes I'll do it for certain things that I'm excited for, but other times I like to try to keep my distance if I want to go in with a fresh mind and not really knowing what else is happening. The opening of this game with Peter and Miles tackling on Sandman in the financial district, Lower Manhattan, was a crazy yet exciting and awesome way to open this thing. Peter's trying out for a job as a tutor at Miles High School, but then he gets word that Flint Marko's causing all this havoc in Lower Manhattan, so he and Miles both take off to stop him, and as a result, Peter loses his tutoring job. Typical Parker luck, right? Now, while we're on that topic, you go from Brooklyn into Manhattan, and that's something that this game improves on drastically from its predecessors. The previous two games in the series, I mean. And even with other Spider-Man games that have an open-world type of feel, like Web of Shadows or the Spider-Man 2 video game with Tobey Maguire, you get to go into other boroughs of the city, minus the Bronx or Staten Island, Queens and Brooklyn. The city feels a lot bigger in scope. To see how the open-world stuff has progressed in the Spider-Man realm of video gaming, compare this from nearly 20 years ago, which was really big at the time, but seeing this now, man, that's impressive. As with the previous game, there's all kinds of stuff that you could come across in your travels across the city. Various crimes will pop up, like break-ins, robberies, symbiote attacks once the symbiote takes over New York, and also after the symbiotes are defeated. Still, they somehow pop up. Those things were so hard. At certain points, you could switch between Peter and Miles, certain places that would require Peter Spider-Man to carry out, and along with certain things that only Miles can do, like finding these stashes that his Uncle Aaron is lying around, or the environmental stations that are led by the Emily May Foundation that Harry Osborn is running, using all these little puzzles to create some kind of a immune pathogen to protect the environment, flying a drone to attack killer bees and create a safe ground for bee nests. Just keep them further away from me. That's all I'll say. Nicolas Cage and I guess, have that in common. Not the bees! Not the bees! There's even little spider bots that you can pick up throughout the city that have these various designs of certain characters from the Spider-Man mythos that hardcore fans are going to recognize. I recognize a good amount of them, and when eventually you find out who's collecting them, I guess it's a connection to the Spider-Verse movies, the animated versions anyway, because the animation style was very similar to it. I think it might actually be that way. I mean, if Donald Glover can appear in the Across the Spider-Verse movie, and the first Spider-Verse has the costume that Peter wears in these games, that's actually kind of neat that they're doing that. I don't know how they managed to get the okay from the studio, Sony at least. Maybe there's some kind of intermediary that could give them permission that I don't know about. Either way, that was really neat to see. And as with the previous games, it's very similar to the Batman Arkham games. You have combos, counters, you can upgrade your tech and your skills and abilities as you earn more points and fight various enemies. And at one point, when you're sneaking around trying to take down all these enemies from above, as long as they don't spot you, you can fire a web from one point to another, walk over it like it's on a high wire, webbing up an enemy and leave them hanging. You can fire a web to distract them away so you can web up the next one so that way they don't see you. And there's a new move that they added in here called the parry move, or if you time it just right, push the L button and the square button when the area around Spider-Man turns red, you can launch some kind of a counterattack when they're going to move in. That took me ages to figure that out, and it wasn't probably until I finished the main storyline that I was finally able to get the hang of everything. There's a couple other things like that in this game that they changed from the previous one. It took forever and multiple times of dying all over again and starting from a certain checkpoint to finally get the hang of certain things. Once you get enough energy, you can go into this rage mode where Spider-Man in his traditional suit, he uses the metallic legs like Tom Holland's Spider-Man has with the Iron Spider suit, goes into like a rage attack of some kind, and of course when he gets the symbiote, he can use the Venom rage, and also with the anti-Venom suit as well, that thankfully is a force for good and not evil. You even get to use the web wings in this one, which are, I guess, a famous thing from the Spider-Man comics. And if you time it just right, you can go through these wind tunnels that can fast travel you to various parts of the city. That way you don't have to spend so much time swinging from one place to another. It gets you there a lot quicker. You can take various photos across the city for Robbie. We even get to hear both podcasts from Jonah Jameson and Danica Hart. I prefer to listen to Danica. She's a lot more uplifting and positive as opposed to Jonah Jameson. But even so, listening to Jameson's podcast is is hilarious. As far as another gameplay thing that I had a hard time adjusting to is that you obviously take damage when you get hit by certain enemies. But as opposed to the previous games, when you hit an opponent, you gain enough focus to heal yourself 1 or 2 or 5 points that you earn. This time until a certain point on the meter fills up, then you can heal yourself. Maybe I'm just spoiled by how the first game did it. I would have preferred it that way. At the same time, I do kind of like how they spun it on its head and tried to make you focus on trying to avoid getting hit, like you're actually in the thick of a fight. Particularly when you fight those large symbiotes, the big hulking ones. God, that took me forever to try to get the hang of it. And I think I must have hovered around, swinging around multiple times, just dodging various attacks, trying to get enough focus to heal myself, and then I go in for the kill, or for the hit. You guys get what I mean. The gameplay also does shift quite often depending on what type of missions you're doing, whether you're playing as Spider-Man or if you're playing a regular everyday thing as Peter or as Miles. Simple things like to try to fix something in the Emily May Foundation or go through Miles's apartment to try to figure out what's going on with Uncle Aaron, or even a flashback sequence when you're young Peter tagging along with young Harry Osborn sneaking through the high school where Peter's just getting used to his powers. I love little things like that. For me, it actually makes you feel like you're living in this world. Also, I just remembered you get to use spider technology sometimes, like these small mini spider bots. Well, you use those in the previous game as well. You get to go through a burning building, trying to help people that are trapped as it's about to collapse. Couldn't help but wonder if maybe Tony Stark supplied Peter Parker with the various technology. Or maybe Peter was smart enough to create that all on his own. It's safe to assume that he had some help along the way. I mean, they don't say specifically in these games, but since the Avengers do exist in this universe, I think it's safe to assume that he might have asked Tony Stark for some help. You never know. You're in dire need of an upgrade. Systemic, top to bottom. That's why I'm here. Moving into the characters and plot, I don't know if this game has quite the same amount of wow factor that the first game did, where you're just completely caught off guard by how good the storytelling is. But it's safe to say, I think, anyway, that Insomniac did it again. Outside of the first two Spider-Man movies, this might be my favorite portrayal of the character. If I could think of my all-time favorite portrayals of Spider-Man, all across the board, it's Tobey Maguire and Yuri Lowenthal. Peter at this point is still reeling from the events of what happened in the previous game, while also trying to progress in his relationship with MJ. But with MJ, she actually does get a job for the Daily Bugle briefly, albeit. But then she creates her own podcast called The New Normal, which she dubs it by the end of the main storyline. And Harry Osborn returns out of the blue, and we get a lot of friendship building time between the three of them when they go to Coney Island and ride on the roller coaster, the Ferris wheel, and I found this to be very heartwarming. I've heard some people say that they are tired of seeing Harry and MJ in every Spider-Man story and that they actually like the MCU for not going through that same trope again. Alright, I can understand that argument. This is, I think, very crucial for the Spider-Man mythos to have Harry and MJ around in some capacity. And most of the time in various interpretations of the Spider-Man character, I think for the most part it is very engaging. Then when certain things happen at Coney Island, it's revealed that Harry is wearing the symbiote, which later turns into Venom. If you stuck around for the post-credit scene in the first game, it did see a glimpse of it when Harry was inside the water tank. At the time, I was wondering, how is that going to fit in if Eddie Brock is somewhere in this universe? Because as far as we knew back then anyway, Eddie Brock was nowhere to be seen or mentioned, and he never shows up in this game. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but I kind of figured that Harry was going to become Venom. I didn't want to settle on that mindset, if you know what I mean, but I did think in the back of my mind, is Harry going to become Venom? Because we haven't seen Eddie Brock anywhere. Oh my god. Yes, he does. And at first, Harry is using the symbiote as a way to become a superhero, since he feels good about being healthy again, especially after learning about Peter's secret of being Spider-Man. He uses it in order to help Peter in his superhero activities, which is, I guess, a nod to the Agent Venom storyline where Flash Thompson gets affected by the symbiote and he becomes Agent Venom, a force for good, which I thought was kind of a neat little detail. This is an edge that I think games have over something like movies or even television. You have a lot more time to pay homage or include certain side characters that wouldn't really get much attention otherwise, because you don't have to finish everything right away. You can take your time swinging around or focusing on other things and get to something later. And also, the web swinging through New York City. There were a couple times where I just wanted to swing through New York and not even bother with what's going on in the ground, because I love feeling like I'm actually Spider-Man. I actually thought of Stan Lee at the end of that 90s Spider-Man show when he's swinging with Spider-Man.
Oh, man!
And at first, the main threat in town is Sergei Kravenov, Kraven the Hunter. There's not a whole lot I can say about Kraven other than a really good portrayal. He was very imposing and menacing and felt like, without hesitation, he would kill you. Whoever the voice actor was, perfect. And I do like how the game kind of throws you in for a loop, making you think that Kraven is going to be the main antagonist of this game, and he definitely is. But ultimately, it's Venom who becomes the main force of opposition. Kraven and his hunters have come into New York, and it's revealed, as you go on this certain mission as Mary Jane, that he killed various Spider-Man foes, and he's about to do the same thing with the Lizard. And he sees Spider-Man as a potential target too. It's the spider I will hunt. This is something I would imagine seeing Kraven portrayed as in the movies or shows or any type of portrayal. I don't really know how he's going to turn out in that movie where he's played by Aaron Taylor Johnson. We'll see how that goes, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over that one. And I guess in a way you could say that they kind of did a nod to Kraven's Last Hunt when he fights Spider-Man in the black suit, except he doesn't kill Spider-Man like he does in that storyline. Actually, he paralyzes him and buries him alive, for those who don't know. Kraven does that to Spider-Man, and Spider-Man does die for a few minutes, but then comes back out of the grave. It's kind of like the Nightfall storyline for Batman when he fights Bane. And seeing the black suit arc that Peter goes through, this is something that we've seen plenty of times in other portrayals of this storyline. When they announced that they were bringing Venom into this game, I thought, of course. I am not a hater of the character of Venom, but I find him to be massively overrated, and almost every Spider-Man fan I've run into says that he's their favorite Spider-Man antagonist, but my personal favorite Spider-Man foe is the Green Goblin, because of Norman Osborn being the father of Peter Parker's best friend Harry. And of course you can make an argument for Doc Ock being the main foe of Spider-Man. If anything, I guess those three guys you could list as the arch nemesis of Spider-Man, but for me it's the Green Goblin. No question. It's not that I don't like Venom, I do, but I don't know if there's really much else you could do with the character, aside from what they do here by making Harry Venom instead of Eddie Brock. Other than that, what else can you do with him? I mean, is there really much else outside of the character other than being an evil version of Spider-Man? Any Venom fans out there can tell me what the big deal is with him, politely, please. Thank you. But I was going to give it the benefit of the doubt and see how they would portray it. And seeing Peter getting influenced by the symbiote after he's saved when he's stabbed by Kraven and nearly dies, the influence the symbiote has on him starts off very slowly. Then you start to hear certain voices where he coaxes Peter into killing certain people, like the enemies, like the Lizard, or even Kraven himself. Kill him. Kill him. Tony Todd is the voice of Venom in this game, and he absolutely crushes it here. Seeing Peter go into full Bully Maguire mode, or in this case, Bully Yuri mode, I found it to be very effective and engaging. I mean, it's not something that I was surprised to see, but seeing how he carries himself, I thought, please, for the love of God, Peter, get rid of this thing. And I like how he and Miles and MJ managed to resolve the issue. It's not like they don't talk to him for long periods of time saying, how dare you act like that? I'm not going to talk to you. No, they clearly see that it's the symbiote affecting him negatively. And when he voices his regrets to Dr. Connors on the phone, he tells him instantly, that was not you. That was the suit. Don't beat yourself up. It's like what Black Widow says to Hawkeye in the first Avengers. When he asks how many people did he hurt, she immediately says, don't. Don't do that to yourself. The boss fight that you have with Miles Spider-Man and the Black Suit Spider-Man, one of, if not the hardest boss fight in the entire game, because it's one Spider-Man against another with the same abilities, although a lot more heightened abilities with the black suit. The thing about these boss fights is the dialogue between the characters. It enhances the plot and progresses it forward while shedding light on where the characters are at. Peter's in a place where he feels like he's actually becoming a hero, whereas in the past he was always insecure about himself, and the suit actually makes him feel good, or so he thinks it does. And he becomes so careless and blind of all the other stuff that needs his attention, puts everybody off that notices the change. Thankfully, they're all smart enough to know that it's not him, it's the suit. So eventually he gets the suit off with the help of Miles. While we're on that subject with Miles, he actually goes through, I think, was a really well-realized arc. He's still struggling with the fact that Martin Lee killed his father, Jefferson Davis, in the previous game, even though it wasn't Martin Lee's original intention. Mr. Negative shows up in this game once again, and at first he feels tempted to kill Martin Lee in order to feel some kind of satisfaction. But inevitably, Miles is able to do something that Peter Parker's never really been able to do: rehabilitate or reform a villain. At one point when they're fighting the symbiotes at City Hall, the symbiote tries to take over Peter once again because some of it's still lurking around inside of him. Lee uses his abilities in order to get inside Peter's mind to try to find out the root of Peter's struggles. And once he and Miles get far enough in, they talk a little bit about certain things that they experienced, like with Miles experiencing the death of his father. Lee realizes the weight of what he's done and apologizes to Miles for killing his father. And they're able to find out that Peter's still feeling regret over not being able to save May. The result? Lee's able to take the negative influence away from the symbiote while it still remains, uses it as a force of good, giving us the anti-venom suit. And it's a good justification, I think, for keeping the symbiote suit around, because the abilities you can use, whamming somebody into the ground, or just going oh my god, I love that so much. It was kind of helpful in the boss fight against Kraven, even though Kraven was one boss fight that I had a really hard time getting used to. I think if I had to guess, it took me at least 15 times, or no, actually, I think it took me about an hour and a half to get through that boss fight alone, from Spider-Man and Kraven to Miles and Peter fighting each other. I'm not kidding. I think it took me until at least 1:30 in the morning one night to actually get through that boss fight. That whole thing altogether, I mean. But yeah, I really do like how Miles was able to help rehabilitate Martin Lee and make him realize the full consequences of what he's done, something that Peter was never able to do with his other foes. And Miles continues to impress Peter whenever they're fighting alongside each other. Peter's just continuously awed by how Miles is able to carry himself. In fact, after Miles is able to help Peter get rid of the symbiote, something that Peter says here:
Spider-Man didn't save me back there. Miles did.
Oh man. That just put a big smile on my face. And it was yet another example of how much I'm actually starting to really like Miles Morales. Beforehand, I didn't really know anything about him and didn't really feel the need to look into him, but the Insomniac games and the Spider-Verse movies, thankfully, have won me over. And even like with Peter Parker's Spider-Man, Miles' abilities with the electricity and the electrical venom, I guess, that took some getting used to as well, but after a while I was able to adjust to it. And when you're playing as Miles Morales, you get to find these various stashes that his Uncle Aaron leaves across the city. You get to talk to him over the phone and learn certain things about him and his father, Jefferson. And once you complete those, it looks like that Aaron might be up to no good, but then it turns out he's moving into the apartment upstairs from Miles and his mother, and that he actually is trying to make a life for himself. A good living, not a bad living like he was as the Prowler. Also, this one set of side missions that requires Miles, you have to try to find a glitch in the illusions experiment that Quentin Beck is using, who's also known as Mysterio in the Spider-Man comics. And if you find one of Peter Parker's backpacks, it has a piece of Mysterio's helmet, indicating that Spider-Man has fought Mysterio once before in this universe. This is the Mysterio that I wish we got in the movies. Not that Jake Gyllenhaal's portrayal was bad, but I would rather not see yet another person wronged by Tony Stark, if you know what I mean. Nevertheless, the illusions that you have to fight through in order to avoid taking damage or defeat a certain amount of enemies in a certain amount of time while also avoiding certain other things that Mysterio throws at you. Those were probably some of my favorite parts of the game, and it was easily reminiscent for me of the Mad Hatter or Scarecrow sequences in the Arkham series. I also really like the design of Mysterio when you see the skull underneath the bowl helmet, or as he's famously called, fishbowl. And not one word of a lie, I was quoting Spider-Man one-liners whenever he fights Mysterio in any other previous games, like the Spider-Man 2 video game or the Spider-Man game from PS1 or N64. Hey, it's Mysterio, the cliche who walks like a man. You finally found a costume the size of your ego. But to shift gears and go back to Peter's storyline, once he gets the suit off, he brings it back to Harry, who's clearly getting worse by the minute physically. And then the symbiote breaks out, leading to...
Harry, are you... Oh, God.
So Harry becomes Venom. This I kind of figured in the back of my mind for a while, once they hinted at it in the post-credit scene of the first game, and I know that some people are not going to like this change. I think it's also in a way very refreshing, and it helped for me to add some legitimacy to the Venom plot, because like I said, we've seen this 1,100,000 million times. After a while, what else can you do with it? So they made Harry the first host, after Peter instead of Eddie Brock. Some people would argue that he's not as compelling as Eddie Brock when it comes to him in Venom. I wouldn't disagree with you, but I still think the basic idea of him controlling everybody through symbiosis, the entire city and therefore the world, that I think was still very much present, and I think they got the point across perfectly. Especially when he infects MJ with the symbiote, who turns her into Scream. I gotta tell you, when that happened, when she throws up her hand over the side of that piece of furniture and you saw the yellow reddish hand, this was my reaction. No! No! That doesn't really last for too long, thankfully, but what I like about that boss fight is when you're fighting against Scream MJ. Couple of things. MJ is clearly trying to fight off its influence. Scream takes all those frustrations that she's been feeling and throws it right back in his face.
I'm sorry, MJ! I took you for granted!
MJ is gone!
No! You aren't! I'm sorry I caused you so much pain! The house! My job! Our life together! I promised you I'd be better, but I wasn't! I should have listened! I should have been there! Your dreams are just as important as mine!
You're lying!
You're just as important!
Enough!
Made for some very compelling boss fight dialogue, and without being too specific, it actually struck a chord with me on a personal level. But once that fight's resolved, MJ gets a call from Jonah Jameson, who she gets a job for, and then this happens.
Watson, where are you with my apple fritters? I'm starving, and
Jonah? Kiss my ass. I quit.
What's up?
That might as well be J.K. Simmons doing the voice. Why don't they get him to voice the character? I don't see how anybody would complain about that. I am kind of surprised that they don't focus too much on what happened after that, her and Peter, but I guess the game didn't really want to harp on that too much, similar to when they find out that Peter was still reeling from the loss of Aunt May deep down. I like that they do acknowledge it, but I do kind of wish that they focused a little bit more on that to try to see where his headspace was at. But again, I guess the game didn't really want to focus too much on it and just keep moving forward. And I get that, but still, a little more attention would have sufficed for me in both of these situations. In that one instance, after Harry becomes Venom, you get to play as Venom for a little bit, which is something that we saw in the Ultimate Spider-Man video game and maybe another one that I don't remember. Web of Shadows, right? I played that game years ago. I didn't really care for that game. It was fun, but it didn't really grab me, personally. It was really fun, though, to play as Venom, just smashing through all of these Oscorp security guards and then fighting Kraven eventually in Times Square, and you get to see him actually bite his head off. They don't show the full thing, thankfully. I mean, young people are going to be playing this game, so it might be too much, but the thought of that, yeah, they got the point across with that one. But when you see him freaking out on these Oscorp security guys, it reminded me of the 2003 Hulk video game when you're fighting the soldiers or the Alcatraz guards. This one was very similar, but with up-to-date gameplay and graphics. And then when you use the L2 and R2 button to leap over long distances, that was really awesome. And I wish that we had more of that, like more missions like that where you play as Venom, but I know that the game didn't want to focus on it too much, otherwise it would have lost its mystique, if you will. Another thing I love about that sequence is that you can hear Norman pleading with Harry to stop doing what he's doing.
Harry, I'm begging you! Stop! out! They're going to kill you out there! I can't lose you too!
Norman Osborn in this game is a lot more sympathetic, I would say, as opposed to his role in the first two games, where he was clearly a narcissist and didn't really care about anybody else other than himself, except for maybe his son Harry. But they show more of a human side with him. When Harry first becomes Venom, he tells Spider-Man, "No! Don't hurt him!" And he tells his security guards to use non-lethal force. So eventually when the big boss fight happens with Harry fighting Miles and Peter and MJ at the Emily May Foundation, up until then I thought, how are they going to top some of the other boss battles? This one, you actually get to see Venom use wings, turning into a bat creature of some kind. Yeah, that was fun to figure out. I'm kidding. Not really. It was a fun fight, but oh god. Certain things that Venom would throw at you. I exhaust myself up here and especially in here. My adrenaline was fluttering. Well, my heart was fluttering, but my adrenaline was through the stratosphere at that point. The boss fight takes place not only at the Emily May Foundation, but before it takes place at the high school, Midtown High, where Peter and Harry went to school, which fits into the original flashback missions where Peter and Harry are sneaking into the high school to get certain things, and it's like a full circle type of moment where you see them fight in the gymnasium that's lifted off the ground from the symbiote, onto the football field, into the other area of the school that's lifted off the ground, throwing in some compelling boss battle dialogue, just like he had with Spider-Man and Otto Octavius in the previous game. Yet another personal connection for Peter to struggle with, since it was his friend and mentor the first time around. Now it's his best friend in Harry Osborn. Eventually they manage to defeat the symbiote with the particle accelerator. The symbiosis is mostly wiped out from the city, but Harry is looking to be on the end of his rope physically, and Norman, who made Spider-Man promise to protect him, gets mad at him when he sees Harry in his current condition, and he starts to grow some resentment towards Spider-Man. Both of them, actually. And then when he's in his apartment and has a tantrum over the possibility of losing his son,
Get the G serum ready. ASAP.
G serum. Wonder what that's all about. I guess now that we're on that subject, they're clearly setting up Norman to be the Green Goblin. I mean, in the previous game, there was no indication that Norman Osborn was the Green Goblin or was planning to be one in secret. It was really obvious from the beginning that they were setting him up for something later on. Thankfully, the developers of the game were taking their time, especially in the post-credit scene where he goes to visit Otto Octavius at the raft and asks if he knows Spider-Man's identity. He asks Otto what he's writing in his book, and he goes, "The final chapter." I was not surprised that they're going to bring Otto back in some capacity, and I would imagine that they're going to bring in a new type of villainous team like they did with the first game with the Sinister Six. They might bring in the Sinister 12 or some variation of it. I don't know. There's a couple other villains that they can introduce along the way. There's some that are still hanging around out there, which we'll talk about. But if I had to guess the main antagonist for the next one, it's Norman and Otto. To theorize for a second what could happen, I've heard various predictions or guesses on what could happen in the third Spider-Man game. I think if there's going to be the Green Goblin, Norman's going to have to test the G serum on himself first to make sure it works on Harry, which is also going to cause him to lose his mind and turn into the Green Goblin persona. He's a very driven guy, as he's shown to be in the previous games. Someone who might be driven a little too much, if you know what I mean. And at one point during one of the MJ missions, if you sneak around his laboratory in his apartment, you can see the various clues on how he's working on something related to a glider or to a bomb, pumpkin bomb. And the one helmet that you pick up, there's one particular part of the helmet where it looks like it might be a smile of some kind. If I had to guess, that's probably going to be the Green Goblin costume. I don't really want to see him look the way he does in the Ultimate Spider-Man. If that's what they end up doing, then so be it. I would prefer the kind of classic look that he's known for. If they could somehow translate that into this game with the helmet look and all that stuff, maybe the MCU, if they're going to recast Green Goblin, that's not Willem Dafoe, they could certainly do it that way. We'll find out how the sequel does it. Also, if I had to guess what the main emotional punch would be for the next one, I think MJ could be the one that gets killed by Norman Osborn, similar to the death of Gwen Stacy, which could cause Peter to lose it and come out of retirement. That could be, since Miles is going to be taking over the Spider-Man mantle for the foreseeable future, and Peter's actually getting a happy ending for once, growing further into a blossoming relationship with MJ, which I thought was really nice and heartwarming to see. It was a typical happy ending, but I'm a sucker for a happy ending, especially in a superhero story, for Spider-Man in particular. It's usually really ill for this guy, and to see him finally get a win, you're not going to hear any complaints from me. Or maybe Peter could die at the hands of Norman Osborn and Otto Octavius, like in a heroic sacrifice of some kind of like what Iron Man did in Endgame. People at Insomniac have likened these games to the first game being the first Iron Man, this one being Captain America Civil War. They didn't say specifically, but I think it's safe to assume that maybe the third game could possibly be the Infinity War / Endgame of this series. I hope that we don't see the death of Peter Parker, but I would not be surprised if that's what happens. Either way, I'm excited to see where they go from here. As far as the other side missions that I managed to complete, that's why it took me so long to get this review up, because I wanted to cover as much ground as I could. At one point, you actually get to track down these unmanned drones, and it looks like it's all going towards the same person who shares the same DNA, supposedly. And at first, that kind of threw me off. I thought, same DNA, what's going on here? Finally, when you track down the person who's controlling this, it's the chameleon's apartment. Hence why it's the same DNA, because he was posing as all these different people. Also revealing that he's the brother of Sergei Kravenov, Kraven the Hunter. As Spider-Man's swinging away, we see the chameleon in disguise, saying, "Don't worry, brother, I will do what you could not." He's basically Marvel's version of Hush, Thomas Elliot from the Batman comics. Not to go on a sidebar, but I do wish that we could see a proper portrayal of Chameleon in live action. He is going to show up in the Kraven movie pretty soon. And he technically, I guess, did show up in Far From Home, but he was addressed as Dimitri, but we don't know exactly what was going on there. But either way, they haven't really done that in the movies as of yet. I would love to see them do something like that, where you're not really sure who the chameleon is. If he's posing as this one person, or the other person, or maybe the guy up the block. And as far as another side mission goes, you get to see a young Peter Parker, as I said earlier, sneaking into the high school, but you get to see a flashback of him getting his first photo to Jonah Jameson and getting that job with the Daily Bugle. Peter is just so innocent in those scenes, but yet it's so endearing and you can't really help but smile and like the kid. It's kind of like a mixture of Toby and Tom's portrayals of the character. Not just with his looks, but also with his personality. Oh my god, I just remembered that they tease Carnage in this one. Okay. So there's a side mission where you have to fight off these cultists who are pyromaniacs. And Wraith, who's also revealed to be Yuri Watanabe from the previous game, if you played the Hammerhead DLC from the first game, she goes down a very dark path after dealing with Hammerhead. She's tracking down this cult's leader that she was initially following up on when she was a cop, clearly using extreme methods to find these people. Obviously, she and Spider-Man butt heads, but eventually they figure out that this leader, known as the Flame, was using his operation to get his hands on the symbiote from Oscorp. At first I thought, who is this guy? What's his deal? And when he picked up the symbiote, I thought, that's what you were after? But then I realized, wait, he's got red hair. And then the symbiote turns red, and I went, oh my god, that's Cletus Cassidy. Also overrated like Venom, but if done right, I'm certainly on board with it. Oh, and also the Easter eggs that they threw in here. The Baxter Building makes an appearance in here. Avengers Tower's still around. And the Sanctum, or the Strange Mansion with Doctor Strange and Wong. And you know what? I was waiting. I was waiting for Doctor Strange to fly in and take the item off of Miles Morales' hands. We never see him though, but the fact that they acknowledge that he exists in this world, yeah, that was pure fan happiness for me. In various ways, mind you. And just when he's about to use the device to transport himself to find Lee, it disappears and he gets a note from Juan saying, hey, thanks, we owe you one. It's just enough of a fan service to get the fans excited over the fact that they do exist in this world, but they definitely hold back. They don't go too crazy with the Easter eggs. Makes me want to see Insomniac do a, video game involving the Avengers or X-Men. Oh, we're kind of getting that with the Wolverine game next year. I mean, apparently it is set in the same universe as the Spider-Man games, but if they want to do a game involving the Avengers or the Fantastic Four, oh my god, can you imagine how that would be? I would love to see that. I don't know if they will do that, but still, a guy can always dream. Future Joe here. I completely forgot to mention the missions involving Mary Jane. Some people are talking about how it's very repetitive and that it doesn't really add anything new to the table. I would more or less agree with that, but what they do in here with these missions is that instead of having the game go into game over when you get spotted by an opponent, you get into somewhat of a fight and you have to dodge into cover in order to lose the enemy's sight of you. And even at one point involving MJ, you have to track down Peter when he's in the black suit in this tunnel, and the look and feel of it is like a horror thriller, which I found to be very effective. I also really like the bond between Miles and his mother, Rio Morales, how it feels like a very natural and healthy relationship between mother and a grown son, and how she's very supportive of him with his Spider-Man activities. And his friend Genki returns, and the way he helps out Miles and Peter, he's basically what Alfred and Oracle were for Batman in the Arkham series. All in all, I really love this game. I don't know if it's quite on the same level as the first game because of how much of a surprise it was, but I think in a lot of ways, it's on the same level, and one of the best Spider-Man stories that I think has ever been told. Combining certain aspects of the MCU and the Amazing Spider-Man series with the storytelling aspects of the first two Spider-Man films by Sam Raimi. Can we also acknowledge the fact that Yuri Lowenthal has said that Tobey Maguire is his favorite portrayal of the character, and one of the developers of these games says that Spider-Man 2 is among the best comic book movies that's ever been created? That should tell you where these guys are getting their influences from. Not dismissing Andrew Garfield or Tom Holland, but hearing them say those things, I thought, my dude. But yeah, really love this game. The more I think about it, I would love to see some DLC content added into this like they did with the Black Cat and Hammerhead in the last one. From what I heard, I think they could potentially have some with Daredevil possibly, and he is mentioned by Spider-Man, not explicitly, but if they were to add him in some DLC format, I'd be all on board with it. And I would even like to see them do another Miles Morales game as a way to bridge the gap between this game and the third one, just like we had last time. Will they do it? I don't know, but either way, with the third game that's clearly being set up, I'm really excited to see more. So thanks guys for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are in this game if you played it all the way through. What was your favorite part of this game? Are you excited to see where they take it in the next chapter? Either way, just let me know down below, and as always, see you in the next one.